action. Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. I'm Duran with DuranSupply.com, where I help you design smarter, not harder. Let's create this vintage t-shirt design for the police using my design template, VINTONE. Alright, let's do it. So we're in VINTONE now. This is going to be a pretty freehand design, as in I didn't like script this video or anything, and I'm just going to sort of format it as if I'm like streaming this to you. So you're pretty much just really coming along with me for the ride every step of the way, and you're going to learn a lot about VINTONE if you don't have it, and if you do have it. As you know, VINTONE is the world's #1 template for designing vintage inspired t-shirts. I love it. I've used it on so many projects, including official work that I've done for Stevie Nicks, Eagles, and Nirvana, which is super cool. So obviously this template gets the job done, as I like to say. I'm not even trying to just sell it to you. I genuinely think that this is one of the most useful products I've ever made for vintage t-shirt design. So it goes without saying that you should go ahead and cop VINTONE if you're looking to create designs of this nature. And also that's what I'm using this entire video pretty much. So get VINTONE. So I'm in the template now, and also I do want to mention that I have this new little keycaster pop-up here that'll show you whatever keys I press on my keyboard. If I'm doing any keyboard shortcuts, you could just refer to what it is down here. I'm going to try and say all of the keyboard shortcuts I do, but in case I don't, or in case you missed something, you can just look down here at this little keycaster, which will show you exactly what I'm pressing on my keyboard as I press it. And also any of the assets I use in this video will be linked in the description if you want to design this with me. So let's go ahead and start. I'll hide this little showcase layer here. And now we're in VINTONE. So the reference graphic that I want to make is actually on a white background. So I'm going to go into the composite group here and just turn off the black background. And since we're on a white background now, we want to hide this texture. Since that's set to multiply, it's going to affect all the whites, so we don't want that on right now. We're going to turn the textures off and have a nice white background for us to use. And I'll bring in a picture of the police here. Go ahead and drag that right into our composite group. And this was actually the hardest photo to find, or not hardest photo to find. It did take me a little bit to find, but it also is the hardest photo to find in high resolution. So every photo I found was in the lowest resolution imaginable, and that makes it pretty hard to work with. But luckily with the way VINTONE works, all of that sort of low resolution compression artifacts get sort of obscured in the processing of VINTONE, but it's still going to be something we have to sort of work our way around. But anyway, I dragged that photo in here. You can see it automatically gets half-toned once it's in the composite group. That's VINTONE for you, pretty neat. Right now it has these halftones on it, but I want more of a grainy look, maybe like a grainy distressed halftone. So to change this from a pure halftone to that, I'm going to open up the dither pattern by double clicking on this choose dither pattern smart object, and I want to add a grain in here. I'm going to choose this medium grain, and I might set the size down a little bit as well to something like 70, so it's not too big of a grain. And I also want to keep those halftones sort of in there, so I'm actually just going to set the opacity of this down to somewhere around like 60, 70, 80, I don't know. I'm going to test it out. So we still have some of those halftones in there peeping through. We also have that grainy look, that Xerox grain is going to come through as well. So now I'll save the smart object with Command S, and once I head back into here, you see we now have more of a distressed halftone look on this image, which is what I'm going for. So step one, I'm going to cut out all the unnecessary stuff like the greatest hits and their logo and whatnot. I'm going to grab a selection of just the band members and put that in a layer mask by clicking on this button down here. And now we have just the band members on our canvas. On our reference design, we have like a ton of brush strokes coming in from the edges to sort of obscure the harsh cutoff here. So that's what I'm going to do right now. That's our second step. So probably the best way to go about that is by getting paint brush stroke brushes for Photoshop. And then there are a ton of free ones available. One of the best websites of all time is Brush Easy. So I'll bring that up right here so you can see. Right here on this website, we have this nice little paint stroke brush kit that we can use in Photoshop. So I already downloaded this, and I'll put that link in the description. We can search up some more if we want more options. Let me just go ahead and see what I have available to me, and I do want them to be free, so there surely is a filter for that. Okay, yeah, the other one was the best option. So I have that already input in Photoshop here. That's all the way done. And at the end, painted brushes, that's straight from the Brush Easy link that I just showed you. And as you can see, they're just like paint stroke brushes. I'll paint really here so you can see. There's just a ton of brushes that sort of mimic or are scanned in, I guess, from a brush stroke with paint. So that's what we're going to use to sort of fade out and obscure these harsh edges here. So I'll go ahead and try out one of these brushes, see what I like. The second one's pretty cool. And then I'm going to go and make sure my foreground color is white. and I'm on a new layer here above our image layer, and I'm just going to paint in with white the spots that I want to sort of fade out of this. And we can use obviously whatever brush we want from here, mix and match, and rotate them using the brush panel here. Where is it? Oh, right here. And rotate them using the brush settings here if we need to. So I'm going to sort of tack that on to our little other brush panel here. So yeah, I'm just going to find what brushes I like and start painting those in on the edges until we find something that looks good and sort of obscures these really harsh edges. So as you can see, I just rotated the angle using the brush settings here. Again, that's in this little icon right here in your brush panel. And I'm just going to paint this in until I find something that looks nice combined with all the other brush strokes I'm going to put in here. So I'm going to mix and match this as well. So let's try out the third brush, see if that's any good. I'm going to rotate this one as well so we can focus on the left side of the graphic here. And these are pretty cool. I really like how authentic they look. But also they got those nice sharp edges on the brush. So it gives us a really cool sort of fade out. We're just going to go through all the brushes here, see which ones fit the best and which ones give a good fade out on the graphic. You can also, if you want to experiment a bit more, do these separate brush strokes on separate layers, and that way you have a bit more leeway. But I'm taking some risks here. I'm just going to do it all on the same layer. This one's pretty cool. I'll throw that in here. Looking a little odd, I must say, because we've got all these sort of separate brush strokes in here. So maybe I'll just hide this layer for now. Oh, I got to get this out of here. I'll hide that layer for now and create a new one and just start experimenting some more and see if there's any sort of grand solution to this. Maybe I'll make the brush strokes a little bit bigger. I also have some other random brushes I downloaded a while ago from, honestly, I don't know where, but you can find pretty similar stuff to all of this on Brush Easy. This one was definitely free. It's called Artista Brushes. I'm not sure where I found it, but if you search that up, maybe you can find it. But I definitely got that for free. So I'm going to use one of these spray brushes here to sort of fade out this little edge, maybe make it like sort of a paint drop look, which would be pretty cool. Okay, so I think that looks all right. And I also have to remember that I'm going to be putting the logo at the bottom here pretty big anyway, so I don't have to do too much work on these edges because the logo is going to cover up a bit of that and sort of obscure any odd looking things here within the fading out of the image. So that was just the left side. Now I'm going to move on to the right side and the bottom to fade those out with a brushy look as well. All right, cool. I think that looks pretty good. We've got the bottom and the right side all faded out, as well as the left side that we just did. All right, that looks pretty good to me. I used a couple of different brush sets to fade out the edges of this image, including the one I just showed you on Brush Easy called Painted Brushes. That did most of the blunt work, and then also another brush kit that I got from I don't know where, but again, called Artista Brushes, which I just used for some extra texturing in here, sort of like a grainy fade. But yeah, this looks pretty good to me. Let's move on to the next step here, and that is to sort of bake this fade into the image. So you notice that we did this on layers instead of a layer mask. So we painted on white on top of the image instead of using a layer mask on the image. And I also created multiple layers for the different sides of the images and the different brush strokes I was using, just so I had more leeway, say if I messed up one and I wanted to go and edit one side later on. And that's why I have them in separate layers here. Once I've done this, I'm going to put these all in a group, all the little brush strokes I made here with Command G, and then I'm going to select and duplicate those out with Command Alt E. And now I have all those brush strokes on one layer. I'm going to hide my group, and I'm going to grab a selection of this layer by holding down Command and clicking on the layer thumbnail here. And then I'm going to go on my original image layer, and since there's already a layer mask on this, I'm going to put this in a group and then throw this brush selection as a layer mask on the group, and that's going to make my image go bye-bye because the layer mask is inverted. So I'm going to invert that again with Command I, and now our selection is actually the black instead of the white on this. So now we have our image actually masked out by those brush strokes, and I can go ahead and hide the actual brush stroke layers because we have it actually masked out on our image. And now I can hide this very ugly big brush stroke panel, put that in there. Photoshop tweaking. Oh no, come on, there we go. Okay, and one more thing I want to do is add some more detail onto this image. So I'll go into this group with our image here, and I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to go up to Image, Adjustments, Shadows, and Highlights, which is an absolute lifesaver of an adjustment when you're using VINTONE or Threshold, because it brings a lot of detail back into those shadows that get lost, and also in the highlights if we turn up that dial. So by default, it'll look like this, but you can also just press show more options and you just play around with all these sliders here, sort of figure out what makes the image look best and what brings the most amount of detail you want back into the image at hand. So mostly the shadows is where the detail got lost. So I'm gonna go ahead and play with these sliders until I find something nice for the shadows, and also maybe a little bit of the highlights as well. Okay, right around here looks pretty good. So here's the before and here's the after. Pretty huge difference right there. Maybe too huge. I'm gonna turn this shadows down a bit. But yeah, that's looking great. I'll press OK on that. And one final thing I will do is take our original image layer from here, bring that on top of the other duplicate we made, and go up to filter, other, high pass. And I want to get some more detail on different parts of the image. So I'm going to set the radius to around somewhere where we could see sort of the middle tier details of the image, so maybe around 15 to 20 range. And then I'm going to press OK and set this layer to overlay. And that's going to pretty much like sharpen up the image. As you can see, if I turn this on and off, it pretty much just sharpens these different parts of the image, and we can layer mask this in where we want it to get that sharpness where we want it. We can also open up this high pass again to see just how much the radius of this effect affects the pretty much overall look of the image. So the higher you turn it up, it's going to emphasize more of those overarching highlights and shadows, and the lower you turn it, it's going to emphasize more of the finer, minute details of the image. So I'm going to keep this around, I don't know, 20 or so, and I'm just going to paint out in the layer mask with a soft brush, not this huge brush. I'll grab a soft round brush and paint out parts in the layer mask where I don't want that sharpness. So somewhere around like these shadows are pretty affected by this, and just get like these really fine details in them that I don't want. I do want a little bit of contrast in those shadows, so I'm going to brush out some places here and there to get us away from that. So that's like a really small, minute effect there, but I definitely wanted to do that just in case, and especially since this is such a low res image that we're working with, I didn't want to leave out any details. So now we got the image pretty much intact, we got it all faded out, it's looking nice. Now let's go ahead and duplicate this out, this whole group with Command Alt E. So Photoshop sucks, so quick workaround for if you ever get that error when you're trying to duplicate out and merge something with Command Alt E, is just do a normal duplicate. So I'm going to duplicate that group and create a new empty layer and just merge that duplicate with the empty layer with Command E. So now we have this group duplicated out onto its own layer. Since I did that method, the layer mask is actually baked into that duplicate. But let's say your Command Alt E actually works, then you're just going to have to apply the layer mask on that layer to get that baked into that layer. So I'm going to hide this below layer now, and I want to get a selection of these guys. So I'm just going to use the select subject function in Photoshop. I'll press W on my keyboard and go to select subject. It's a pretty decent selection, so I'll make the layer mask on this layer. So now we have everything selected pretty nicely. If I turn this background into black, you see we have these guys sort of separated out without the background. So I'll turn this back to white, and I'm actually just going to apply this layer mask as well so that we have just the selection of these guys along with the brush strokes that we painted out on top of them. I'm going to bring this all the way to the top here. I'll delete that, I don't need that. And I'll put all the rest of this in a group to sort of go back to if I need to later, but I hope I don't need to, but that's just there for fail safe. Now we have our processed band image on its own layer. Let's go ahead and throw the logo in here. I'm going to move this up a bit to make space for the logo, and then I'll grab a PNG or SVG actually that I downloaded of their logo and throw that in here, scale that up to size. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the logo is going to be pretty big on top of the graphic, so I didn't want to fret too much on the fade out of the bottom here especially. One thing I do want to do actually is make the on this logo smaller, so I'm just going to rasterize this actually and select out the using my polygonal lasso tool, which is L on my keyboard, I believe. Let's see, yeah, it's L on the keyboard. So I'll select out, and then I'll do Command T on my keyboard to bring up transform controls and just make that a little bit smaller so it's not going to clash too much with the rest of the graphic. And I do want to throw a layer style on this. Obviously you can't see the logo too well right now, so let's open up the layer styles, and the first thing I'll add is a stroke. It's going to be an outside stroke, but this is all out of whack, so let me reset that to default. Position I'll set to outside. The color I want it to be white so that we can actually start seeing the logo I'm just going to bring up the size a bit, not too much. I'm going to keep it pretty low, around, I don't know, 8 or something, because I'm going to add a drop shadow now. So let's go into the drop shadow, and I'm going to reset that to default as well. I want the color to be on white and the spread on 100, because when the spread is on 100, we get these super harsh lines on that drop shadow, and it sort of resembles a stroke, but we can actually change the distance of this stroke or drop shadow, which makes it a really cool option for layer style. So I'm going to turn the size just around, I don't know, something low like 5, and I want to play with just the distance here pretty much and get sort of a extruded effect on the text. And I'm also going to change the angle to something like, I don't know, 50, something around there. Just play around with this until I find something neat. Now check this out, we can also duplicate this drop shadow, go down to the bottom one and set the color to black. And as we increase the size, we sort of get a stroke on that previous drop shadow, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to increase the size a bit to maybe around 12-ish, 10, 12-ish. Maybe play with the distance a bit as well. And now we get sort of this cool double stroke look on this text here. Now there are a few other things we could play with to really get a cool layer style on this. But this is something I might come back to later once I start doing the coloring so that I know what my options are. But just for now, I can also add a gradient overlay if I want. This one's just a simple linear black to white gradient overlay with the sort of black at the meeting point between the image and the text fade out, or the image fade out and the text, which is a cool look. And I can also say add an inner shadow on top of this, which would be pretty cool. Just a standard inner shadow, choke up a bit, size up a bit. And I can play with the distance as well. Get a cool look on this. So this is a pretty cool layer style, I must say. I'm gonna leave it like this for now, but I'm probably gonna come back to this later to do some more, final touches on this. But I'll leave this like this for now. It's looking pretty good. Okay, cool. Now I want to place my focus more on the coloring of this graphic. Since we got the composition pretty fleshed out, let's go up to the colors group up within VINTONE. I'll open that up, and we're going to start obviously with color 1. And let's go ahead and open that group up, open up this buffer group. And within VINTONE, as you know, or as you don't know, whatever you paint in these color groups is going to be automatically dithered with the dither pattern of your choice. So I'm painting with a standard soft brush here, which normally would have transparency on it. But as I paint in this layer mask within VINTONE, in this color group, it's getting automatically half-toned or dithered with our dither pattern of choice. So that's a very, very cool part about VINTONE. And that is also why the color setup is a bit funky, but you basically paint your colors in one by one, sort of like a coloring book, and you choose your color with the layer style on the color group, the color overlay, but you paint your colors in the mask inside of that group, or really whatever you paint in white inside of this group above this black layer here, but below this layer. So whatever you paint in white is going to take effect as that color. So it doesn't necessarily have to be inside of that layer mask. That's just a neat thing I put there for workflow purposes. You can always just paint on a separate new layer just with the color white, and it's going to apply that color wherever you paint. So let me go ahead and get rid of this mess right here. And we're going to start off by painting in their skin tones. So we can actually just paint in wherever I want on here. I'm going to paint in everywhere on this graphic, because what I'm going to do is put this in a group with Command G. I'm going to put this actual colorful layer with the layer mask inside of a group. And I'm going to put a layer mask of the guys on top of this group. So that way we sort of clip whatever we paint in here to the band members. So let's go ahead and grab a selection of them by holding down Command and clicking on that layer thumbnail back in the composite group on our image layer here. And we'll go up to the group on top of this paint and mask layer in this color group and make a layer mask with this button right here. And now wherever we painted falls inside of this layer mask on top of that group. So wherever I paint, I can paint outside the lines or whatever. It's going to only affect the band members. Of course, it's also bleeding a little bit into the text, but that's something we're going to fix later on. So for right now, I'm not going to pay any mind to the text. I'm just going to lock in our skin tone. So again, we change the color by using the color overlay on the color group. So I'll go ahead and set this to a nice sort of yellowish orange here, maybe something like this. There we go, right around here. I'll press OK on that, and now we got our skin tones locked in. And for organization purposes, and this is vital, I know we don't like naming our layers, but we really have to when we're using this template, because you're not going to get by having all these just labeled as color 01, color 02. So I'm going to go ahead and name this color group skin. That way I know it is the skin color group. And now I want to do the hair. So I'll open up color group 02, open up that buffer group, and I'll do the same exact thing I did with the skin color group here. I'm going to put this in a group. I'm just going to drag that layer mask from the previous color group by holding down Alt and dragging that layer mask onto this group. And now I can paint in this mask wherever I want. So now I'm going to do the hair. And obviously this is not the color I want for their hair, but that's just to demonstrate the power of that layer mask. I'm also obviously going to paint in their hair better than this. But for right now, I'm going to change the color of their hair to what I want it to be, which is a nice orangey golden blonde. Maybe make it a little bit lighter. I think this is pretty good. I'll press OK on this, and I'm going to fine tune the selection for this hair. So you can use a soft brush, you can use a hard brush, you can use whatever brush you want. You can even use a hair brush if you really want fine details. But I'm just going to use a soft, sort of hardish brush here. So I'm going to turn the hardness up to like 30. I'm just going to start painting in his hair, or all their hair, in the layer mask here. Pretty simple stuff, obviously. I mean, again, it's sort of like a coloring book where you really can't paint outside the lines because we have the power of layer masks on this group. So you get these nice fine details in your hair here, these sort of wisps and streaks of hair. Don't want to forget about these sideburns either. And also the hairline here is a bit funky, so let me just mess around with that a little bit. Honestly, for edges of the hair like this, where it's a little bit hard to tell where the hairline is, I just use a soft brush on 0% hardness to get sort of a gradient fade there. That way it's not too obvious where I put the hairline. I'm just sort of obscuring it for the viewer, and then hopefully that's just something they don't pay much attention to. All right, nice. I've got the hair all done here. Let's move on to the glasses, which I want to add a pop of color in. And again, I'm going to name my layers. So I'm going to name this hair. I'm going to go on to color group 03, open all these groups up, and again, I'll paint in here wherever I want the colors to be. So I'm going to set this to sort of a greenish. We'll go into the layer styles here and make that a nice green. Something around here works pretty well. I'm going to finish painting in on that layer mask around the frame and the eyes on these glasses. All right, cool. And I also want to do the same for these glasses right here, but I do want to make those blue. So I'm going to have to make a new color group for that. I'm just going to name this green, and then I'll go up to this new color group and I'll paint in the glasses here. And I'll choose a blue color. That's a nice looking blue. Press OK on all that and go back to the layer mask and start painting that in as well. And I actually also want to make his jacket blue. So I'm going to make a new layer here since I'm already in the blue color group here. Let me actually name that blue so I don't get lost, and go and paint in with white in my primary color on a new layer. Paint in wherever I want that blue to be. Let me go back to a soft brush actually and paint all over his little, I don't know what this is, little jacket here. As you can see, we're really bleeding into the text now, and it doesn't look all that nice, but just keep in mind that that is something we're going to fix down the road, so I'm not worrying about that right now. And I also want to make sure that everything I paint on this is within the lines or the layer mask of the group that I had earlier. So let me just go ahead and drag that back in here onto this layer. Cool. Just because of how distracting it is, I'm actually going to go ahead and hide the logo here before I do anything else. All right, cool. Now I want to add some highlights in here and some white. For example, on their shirts, their undershirts, I want to add or make those white, and also add some slight highlights, maybe to their face or within their hair, of pure white. So how can we do that within VINTONE? It's a pretty interesting process to follow closely. We're gonna go up to color 05 here, and I'm actually gonna duplicate this a few times first, just so we have some stock color groups that we can go back to if we need, because we're gonna add some more colors onto all of this later. And we wanna kind of start with a fresh slate on the color groups. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up color group 05 here. And the first thing I wanna do is actually go back. So inside of this color group, we're actually not gonna be doing any painting. We're gonna go ahead and drag a duplicate of our original image from the composite into that color group, and that's going to sort of map that color of that color group onto the highlights or shadows of this image, and you'll see what I mean in just a second here. So I'm going to go ahead and drag a duplicate of this by holding down Alt and dragging this all the way up into this color group. And as you can see, it made our whole graphic the color of the color group, but you'll see if we start messing with the levels of this photo, that's actually mapping that color to either the highlights or the shadows of the photo. So I'll cancel that for now. I want to make the color of this color group white because we're doing the white highlights. So I'll just make that white real quick, and I'll throw a levels adjustment on top of this image layer here. I'm just going to turn the levels all the way down to really isolate those bright white highlights. I'm pretty much just going to use these on the hair and maybe the glasses or the jacket here. So I'm actually going to make a layer mask on this layer and just start painting out the parts where I don't want these highlights. So I'll take a black soft brush and start painting over the skin, which is where I really don't want the highlights because it's just way too prominent. So I'm going to paint over all of these skin tones here, get rid of that. And it's also a bit too prominent on the sleeve or the shoulder here. So I'm going to paint that out a bit as well. That's looking pretty good. Also, by way of the shirts in this photo being such a bright white, we sort of already got the shirt highlights dialed in without having to paint them in, just because they were so bright. So they became part of those highlights, obviously, that are tied in with this image. Okay, cool. This is where things get real fun. Now we can start using the highlights and shadows of the image to map where I want different colors to be. For example, the white highlights I just did. One thing I want to do is make his jacket here a nice red orange. So I'm going to go ahead and actually first thing I'll do is name this color group white highlight 01. And I'll put this in a group so we could do the same thing we did with the mask from before. So I'll go ahead and drag that layer mask onto this group as well. And now I can start painting in on his jacket here. And I'm going to turn this into a red in just a second. Okay, I painted that in. I'm going to go into the color overlay and change that to a nice deep red, something like this. Looking good. I'll name this layer red jacket. I also want some highlights on this jacket. So what I'll do is actually duplicate this white highlight color group, and I'll bring that above the red jacket color group. So holding down Alt and just dragging that above the red jacket color group. Now I can go into this second highlight layer, and this is actually going to be a yellow highlight. If it were to be a white highlight, all I would have to do is drag the white highlight above the red jacket layer since the colors are stackable. But I do want this to be a yellow highlight, so I'm going to actually make the color of this a nice yellow, probably the same yellow I use on the hair. And that's already a pretty cool look. You can see it popping through on the jacket here and on the glasses. So maybe we'll use that in some other spots as well, but I do really want it on the red jacket here. So I'm gonna go ahead and mess with the levels until I can find a nice spot for that. That's pretty nice, I'd say. Now I just have to layer mask this highlight layer to where I want it. So I'll go on this image layer here like we did before, make a layer mask. I'm actually just going to invert this with Command I, so we can start on a blank slate, and I'll just paint in those yellow highlights where I want them. So on his jacket, I also thought it looked pretty cool on these glasses right here. Maybe even to fill in that sort of spot on his shoulder would be pretty cool, having a nice yellow highlight, a little bit of a touch there. Okay, that is looking pretty damn cool. One more thing I want to do is maybe add a touch of more detail in these shadows here. So we're going to do a similar thing like we did with the highlights, but instead of isolating the highlights, we're going to isolate these shadows and add their own tone to them instead of just black. So let's go ahead and actually just duplicate either one of these highlight layers so that we can sort of skip the step of dragging that image into one of these color groups. So I'm just going to duplicate this white highlight group, and I'll name it, instead of highlight, I'll name it dark shadow or something. And then inside of this group, I'm going to take this layer mask off. And as you can see, you can mess with the levels of this to affect where that color lands on those highlights. But if you want to isolate that to the shadows instead of the highlights, we can actually just invert this image that's right below it. So doing Command I on that image, now we can sort of map this color to these shadows. So as I mess around with these levels, you can see that these shadows are now being affected by this white color. Obviously we don't want it to be white. We're going to change that color right now. So I'll go into the color overlay on this group, and I'm going to change this to like a darker, maybe skin tone or something. I don't know. Even this random color looks pretty cool. This sort of dark mud color is really cool. I think I might go with that, but it's a bit too prominent right now still. So I'm gonna mess with these levels until I find a nice spot for it. I'm also gonna layer mask these shadows into where I want so that it's not too prominent in some spaces, like on the jacket here or on the forehead here. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a layer mask on this layer and paint out with black where I don't want those shadows to be as prominent, especially on the hair. I want to keep that pretty vibrant. So I'm gonna paint that out all over the hair as well. Or alternatively, I can just drag the hair layer above the shadow layer since the colors are stackable. So now all the hair color layer is sort of overtaking the shadow layer. But yeah, so I'm gonna keep painting in these shadows where I want them. All right, this is a nice spot, I think. I'm really liking this. Now we can throw that logo back in here from the composite. And as we can see, all the colors of this logo are being overtaken by all the color groups we did. So what we want to do is actually take a selection of this logo, and then we're going to make a color group up here set to white or whatever color we want the logo. We're going to have that all the way on top of all the color groups so that it takes precedence. Since we have layer styles on this, when we take a selection of the logo or the text, it actually just takes a selection of the raw pixel data from that layer. So it's not including any of the layer styles on it. So I'm actually just going to drag the whole layer, a duplicate of this whole layer, up into this top color group up here, this last color group that we have left. I'm gonna go ahead and hold down Alt and drag that all the way up here. And now you can see that the color on this color group is now overtaking all the colors below it because the colors are stackable within VINTONE. So this is the top color. It now takes precedence. And now the logo is filled in with the color of this color group. I'm gonna go ahead and change this though to either white or maybe a yellow or something. I don't know. Yellow does look pretty cool. One thing I definitely want to do, and something that's very important within VINTONE, is linking your layers. As you can see, if I go down here and I want to move the logo, the color group that I made for it does not move with it. So what we could do is actually select both this layer that's in the composite and this layer that's in the color group and just link them. That way, when we move one, it moves the other. So if I wanted to move this logo around, I can move it, and the color group or the respective layer inside of the color group will move with it. Okay, so after some thinking, I've actually turned the logo white instead of yellow because I think it just fits a little bit better with the rest of the composition. It doesn't overpower the band members. And also I went and added some nice little yellow highlight within the texture, which is pretty simple. I just, painted in the gradients on top of the text. So there's just a little bit of splash of color in that logo. And now we're pretty much done with this graphic. It's looking great, but there's some final touches that we can do to make it look even better. And not only that, we can also prepare it for print. So we're gonna color separate this out and prepare it perfectly for screen print. If you're making a design like this for a band or for whatever, and it's being sent off to print, the printer is gonna love you, and that is another big benefit. One of the main benefits of VINTONE is that it's all perfectly printable. As you can see, if I zoom in here, this is all pixel by pixel. There's no transparencies in here. So it's already all halftone for us, and the color separation process is very easy. I'm gonna show you that right now. I'm actually gonna add a little bit of sauce from my ink roll texture kit. This is available on my website. I'm gonna drag in ink roll 01 here on top of all the composite, and I'll set that to screen, and I'm also going to invert it. So now we have this really cool texture on our whole graphic here. This is, pretty prominent right now. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the levels of this texture and just crank that down a bit, so it's not overpowering the graphic, but it does add some real nice texture into this. So right now it's actually having some of the colors from the color groups bleed into the texture, which isn't really what I want. So I'm actually just going to drag this texture all the way on top of everything here on top of the colors as well. I'm going to make sure this is thresholded actually, so that we don't have any transparencies still. If I zoom in, you can see all the transparencies of the texture. We don't want that. So I'm going to threshold this. I have the keyboard shortcut Command F on my keyboard to do that, but you can just go into image adjustments and then threshold. I'm going to turn this down quite a bit because I don't want the texture to be too prominent within this, maybe right around here. All right, this is looking very nice to me. It's time to do some final touches and color separate this out. So once I'm done with everything, I'm going to close the VINTONE group entirely, and I'm going to do Command Alt Shift E on my keyboard, and that's going to duplicate and merge everything onto one layer. So now I can hide this VINTONE group, and we have everything on one layer. I want to select out and delete the white background using my magic wand tool. So I'll press on the white here and just delete that out. So now we have our graphic on a transparent background. Now we can start separating out all the individual colors within this graphic. So go ahead and take your magic wand tool and make sure anti-alias is unchecked and contiguous is also unchecked. That way you don't get any unwanted transparencies in your selection. We're just going to go right in here, and the first color I want to separate out is this black here. So I'll go ahead and click on that black and then do layer via cut, and that's going to separate that out onto its own layer. The reason I do the black first is because there's a really neat trick once you separate out the blacks is to add sort of a misregistered print effect, and also just changing the color of the blacks can have a huge effect on your graphic. So I'm going to open up the layer styles of this black color that we separated out. And if I turn on a color overlay and just start messing with that, you can see the graphic really takes on sort of a new form once we introduce some lighter color into the blacks here. So say like a really nice light gray or dark gray, I mean, with some greenish tints. Really looks nice with this graphic. And we can also add a cool misregistered print effect by going and turning on the inner shadow. I'm going to reset that to default. I'm going to turn the color to a white, put the size at 0, the choke at 100, and once I start playing with the distance, I'll zoom in here so you can see, once I start playing with the distance, we get that sort of misregistered print effect on our graphic. I'll zoom out so you can see what that sort of looks like in big picture mode. We can also mess with the angle here to get a cleaner effect. So I'm going to change this distance to 3, keep the angle right around, I don't know, -30 or something. That looks pretty good to me. So here's the difference just from adding that misregistered print effect and that color overlay onto just the blacks of this graphic. Pretty cool stuff. Now let's go ahead and start separating out all the other colors. So very simple process. Just take your magic wand and select out each individual color within the graphic and to layer via cut. And we do want to name these. So I'm going to name this green. I'll name this black up here, and then I'll separate out the yellow, name that yellow, so on and so forth. All right, it's looking very good. This graphic is pretty much finished. I really like how it came out, and we now have it all color separated onto their own layers. So if you're going to send this to print, this is perfect for that. Personally, if I were going to send this file off to my printer, here's what I would do. We got the color separation out of the way. Now I'm going to select all the color layers that I just made or just selected out, and I'm going to turn that into a smart object. So select all of them and convert to a smart object. And now once we double click on that smart object thumbnail, we have a new document clipped to the bounds of the graphic, and all we have in this document is the color layer that we just selected out. And again, as you can see, all of it is perfectly halftone, very nice and easy for your printer, and it's all perfectly color separated, nice and pixel by pixel. Now you could just save this as a PSD and send this layered file to your printer. Obviously, this is a concept design. Please don't send like copyrighted graphics to your printer. This is just a concept to show you what you can make with VINTONE and how to design within VINTONE, but don't go sending this exact graphic to your printer, obviously. I think this looks fantastic. Let's throw this on a nice little Duran Supply mockup right here. This is available on my website, of course, as is VINTONE and all the textures I showcased in this video. Scale that down to size, and boom, looks pretty damn cool. Bet you can make a pretty hard fit with this t-shirt. Okay guys, that is a wrap. Seems like y'all are enjoying the longer form sort of step-by-step videos. So I really hope you enjoyed this one. Hopefully you either learned something or just enjoyed watching. Obviously the design in this video is centered entirely around my product VINTONE. So hopefully watching this video let you know if VINTONE is something you want to include in your design process. I of course would highly recommend adding it to your design toolbox. Like I said, I've used it on so many projects for so many big artists, and it's pretty much never let me down. And doing videos like these showing you the process of how I use VINTONE hopefully translates to when you're working on a project. I know quite a few designers who have enjoyed using VINTONE on official artworks for pretty big names, so I honestly can't recommend it enough. You can go pick that up on my store right now for 15% off using the code YouTube15. You can also pick up some of my textures or mockups while you're at it to really step up your vintage design and creation process. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like this video if you like the video, and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. I post these videos every week to help you become a better designer. So I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace out.